Hi everyone and welcome to this training video from Firms Consulting, which is about the enormous amount of data we've collected for the first season of session 1. Now, we strongly believe in using data to make decisions because it's very easy to use anecdotal evidence to draw spurious, or in English, terrible conclusions. And then when we publish it on the website, we're basically giving clients very bad advice. So we've decided not to do that. It's a bad way to run a business. And what I've done here is in the 12 slides that follow, I'm going to spend most of my time on the 6 most important ones. I'll talk about the others because I think it's important you know them. But the 6 most important ones, I think, are the ones you need to keep in the back of your head when you are self-practicing. Beyond that, there's a lot more data that we've collected on each of these candidates. I mean, we've counted the number of mistakes they made per session, the type of mistakes, is it a grammar mistake, a math mistake? But there's such a thing as too much data. And I'm sure a lot of people would love to play around with the data, but until we figure out a way to present that in a much more intuitive, user-friendly, and useful way, we have decided to simply capture the main points here, right? So whenever you see a orange triangle in any of our documents, you know that's an important document, right? Or at least the page is important, and that's what you need to pay attention to. So this is an interesting slide because what we have is that we had a lot of the training videos that we gave to clients, to candidates. We gave it to Felix, Samantha, Rafik to watch this before the session began. Now, that's called a case video library. You would have access to that as well. And, you could see what they watched before the session. Now, we used a system called Wistia to track usage. So the system could tell us who logged in, when they logged in, which part of the video they watched, how many times did they watch it, what is the watching intensity. Now, that allows us to tell us who watched the most of the videos, which would be down here, and who watched the least videos, which should be up there. It's not just the number of videos, within a video how much they watched, right? So you can see Samantha now. We could very quickly see with Samantha, and Samantha does, admit to this later, that she would fast forward through the videos and just focus on where we presented the approaches. So if you just watch the technique, sort of copy down the framework we teach, you're going to be in the unenviable position of not being able to explain it because you haven't seen how we apply communication techniques to explain the concept, right? Now, to me, that's the first lesson here. So when you are practicing, don't just practice the hard stuff, which is what most people do. I remember once someone telling me, Michael, send me the frameworks, we'll memorize it. You'll fail. You got to practice the soft stuff as well. How you communicate is just as important as what you communicate. So that's the how, that's the what there, right? Now there's another key lesson here. You can see very quickly that everyone was trying to get time with Kevin Coyne. So you can see the diligence of preparation is increasing here. I mean, it's a steady trend. There's no dispute here, right? And then you can see that once we remove the penalties, things started getting I wouldn't say a lot out of hand, but definitely there was an upward trend here. And then in session 20, I introduced another penalty which says that we only take 1 student per session 20, and that's when Sanjeev got removed from the program in session 21. Now, what is the most important lesson here for you? There are 2 lessons. 1, you will not be able to stay the course unless there's an incentive or a penalty attached here. The incentive or the penalty can be something hard or something soft. It could be something such as, you move your vacation back until you finish your case interviews. That's a hard penalty for me. A soft penalty could be something as simple as, well, I will watch a movie after every Saturday when I spend at least 2 hours practicing the cases. The point is, humans like incentives or penalties. We may not admit it, but we use it effectively to manage our behavior. That's the first lesson. The second lesson here is that learning frameworks is a very, very bad idea, right? Because that's basically what Samantha did. If you memorize frameworks, you're going to suffer. So first lesson, have incentives and penalties. Second one, frameworks are basically useless. And you got to understand the communication and the brainstorming technique that was used to develop the framework, right? So let's look at another important lesson. Now this to me is one of the most important lessons. Now let's pay attention to Felix, right? The blue here is Felix. Felix is quite interesting because you can see that her learning spikes after the resume sessions. The resume sessions end here. Oh, that's resume. Felix's learning spikes after that, dips, spikes again, dips, spikes again. I think this was session 9. Session 8 seems to be a big improvement. Session 9 was a debrief session. We didn't actually do cases. We kind of had a discussion there, so her learning would drop. And then it spikes again when we get to session 10, when we did communication, 11 complex estimation cases, and then when we did 12 and 13 here, right? Now the interesting thing about coaching styles is that when I see a big dip like that, or when I see a steep increase like that, I go to Felix and say, Felix, you registered the steep increase. And remember, the scores here are self-reported. The candidates know the criteria we have for them, and they need to report it. And I say, okay, why this big increase? What did we do differently that caused you to learn more? Did we do something differently? Did we use a different technique? And Felix will explain as well, Michael, the reason I learned more is because I didn't know anything about this area, so that's why I learned more. It's not because you did anything differently. I said, okay, so for you, in that area, it was content that changed things, not something we did. So then we keep on looking for ways to change our content. Now, if Felix registers a big drop here, I'd want to know, hey, Felix, what happened? Was the content not good? Did we use a poor teaching technique? Now, what I'm trying to figure out here is that, is there anything we could have done to have improved Felix's rate of learning? Now, what does this mean for you as a subscriber practicing by yourself? Well, if, let's say that's you're going to have practice partners. Practice partner 1, practice partner 2, practice partner 3, practice partner 4. Now, what's very important is that when you're practicing cases, you need a practice partner who is conscious of the fact that the way they structure the session, the way they're going to run the session, the style, the issues they generate will have a fairly big impact on how you perform. If you have someone with whom you're not doing well in your practice sessions, but who's unwilling to adapt and change to help you improve, that's a pretty bad practice partner. Now, my strategy would be, if that's you should have group 1 practice partners and group 2. Now, group 1 must be your constant partner, and group 2 must be a rotating partner. Why is that necessary? Your constant partner is someone who gets to know you well over time and is able to see the things you're trying to hide from people that you may meet only once. It's possible to hide things to someone if you meet them only once. You may be able to hide a flaw. But someone you practice would constantly be able to bring that up. Now, the way to use a constant practice partner is to collect the flaws from them and feed it to your new practice partner. So don't just say to someone, hey, you know what? I want to do some cases. Let's practice. You've got to help them help you. You've got to take the information from your constant practice partner, summarize it, please. Top 3 things that you're doing badly, and top 3 considerations to keep them, on the back burner. If you give them any more and these long explanations, they can't do anything about it. So if you tell them communication is a problem, explain what you mean by communication. You can't explain things, you're not concise, and ask them to stress test those things. Now, what makes this easy is that, what makes this useful is that if you get a new practice partner and they don't know what your weaknesses are, they spend the first 45 minutes just finding out what those things are. And the first 45 minutes are wasted, so you only have the last 15 minutes of the case that is useful. If you feed them in advance what the issues are, they can very quickly test those in the first 15 minutes. If you're right, try to help you in the next 45 minutes. If you're wrong, at least then they've tried to get it right, and they can still be more efficient because they know the way you think. So I think that this ability to have good practice partners, or coaches, whatever you want to call them, is very important. But the coach must adapt to improve your learning rate. He must say, you know what, this is how you've been improving. This is where your weakness. This is your consistent weakness. In the last 4 sessions we've done, sessions 7, 8, 9, 10, you've consistently messed up recommendations. So let's zoom in on that and see what's happening. But this needs to be an intelligent coach or intelligent practice partner. Now, one of the other important slides or important pieces of feedback is acting as feedback makes a pretty big impact. Now, what we have here is we have the percentage of feedback followed from the previous session. Now, so what would happen is that I would give, in session 8, I would give feedback to Felix. and the rest of the students. And I would look at session 9 and say, okay, how much of that did Felix follow? What percentage of that? And how well? So it is both the number that she focused on and how well she did it. And you can look at Felix's score again, the blue, big spike here, but constantly strong. Now she starts dropping here, and I think that had a lot to do with the fact she was managing a lot of things with her thesis and so on, but then she spikes again as she brings things under control. You can see Rafik, when we have special session 6, we give him the 4 things to focus on. Massive improvement. I mean, he becomes one of the top candidates. He conceivably could have been one of the top candidates, but then he lets it all fall apart in session 10, and he basically never recovers, right? Samantha struggled to follow feedback that was non-linear. If you gave Samantha a checklist to follow, excellent. Like resumes, a checklist. But as soon as the checklist fell away, it was critical reasoning, struggled. A big improvement here, but that's a 2 weeks delay. I think it may have been a 3 weeks delay. So big improvement, but takes a too long time to get that improvement. Now, what does this mean for you? Whenever you do a case with someone, always ask them this. What are the 3 things you could do to generate a 30 to 40% improvement? Do not get a list of 20 things. But you get a tail there, like that. All of those things are irrelevant. Only that you need to focus on in terms of your improvement areas, and there's only 3 or 4 things. When you are then doing the follow-up session with them, I tell people, print out a sheet of paper with those 4 things written, keep it in front of you, and you need to make super sure that you are aggressively focusing on those things. And I thought Felix was pretty good at that. In fact, Felix was so good that if I told her at 41 minutes in a case that she needs to focus on something, in 42 minutes into the case, she's already focusing on it. So acting on feedback does make a difference. It makes a difference in 2 ways. Firstly, you are being productive. You are doing a follow-up session and making sure that the main mistakes you had in the last session are being focused on. But more than that, the person with whom you are practicing sees you as serious, and they are more willing to help you, right? Now, everyone's obsessed with cases. I don't know why. Cases is only part of it. If you don't have a good resume, you don't have a good LinkedIn profile, you don't network, you're not going to get the interview itself. So no matter how good you are with cases, it doesn't matter. The probability score is the aggregate score. It tracks everything that you need to do well at cases. And you can see here that around session 9, everyone sort of converged. It was anyone's game, right? Session 9. It could have gone anywhere in session 9. But what do you see? You see this massive collapse. This is cricket, we'd call it an innings collapse for Rafik. Samantha never really rose up, but still a collapse afterwards. We see the steady progression down for Sanjeev, driven by the lack of what I called effective networking. Felix does fairly well. She peaks and troughs along a narrow range. A big dip here as she struggles to remember some of the key things we taught her, but then a massive improvement. So now, when you are practicing cases, do not neglect things like working your resume. When someone tells me, Michael, I'm going for networking, and I ask them, but you haven't finished your resume, what are you going to tell someone if they ask you what you did in your current job? You haven't even thought about that. They don't know what they tell me. That's a warning sign for me. So I score them heavily down on probability scores. Now, probability scores it shouldn't be what you may do, it's what you have done. So if you catch that mistake in advance and you fix it, you have this well-edited resume, well-edited cover letter, well-edited LinkedIn profile. That's good. But do things in sequence. If you're just focusing on cases, but not on getting the interview, you have a problem. If you just focus on getting the interview and not on cases, you have a problem as well. But I really am willing to give people the benefit of the doubt if they start off just focusing on cases, focusing on getting the interview, provided they eventually get to focusing on cases, right? Probability score, far more important than your case score, right? So make sure you're keeping control of everything. Now, the most important score is the business judgment score. The business judgment score matters more than anything else, and business judgment is not something you're going to learn in 2 weeks before a case. Now, if you have weak business judgment 2 months into a case, it's going to be tough to improve. Now, business judgment is easy to fix. Business judgment means improving your business knowledge around general issues and also improving your business knowledge around business. And what that means is that when you get to a case and you have two facts that are unrelated, you can apply your best guess to figure out what's the link between them. And basically you're making a judgment call, or you're making a guess, and the best way to improve your guesses is to improve your general knowledge. Now, Felix, I gave it a very strict regimen of reading, McKinsey Global Institute, McKinsey Quarterly, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Bloomberg, and the Washington Post. And I tested on this, right? I was constantly grilling, and I was very, very happy to see how she kind of rose from session 19, because she was able to do things that I didn't expect her to do, purely because she was able to pull things that we had covered previously, so her business judgment had been improving. Now, I don't think Sanjeev's business judgment wasn't bad, but it was degrading over time. I think that Rafik and Samantha overall a degrade, because what this doesn't show is the time between the sessions, and they were getting a lot of time, which is why they had an improvement. Now, if your business judgment is strong, I can tell you right now, firms are more than happy to take a chance on you and hire you. If your business judgment is weak, firms will not take a chance on you because it's very hard to train someone. Business judgment preparation must begin 4 to 5 months in advance. It's not as if you read the New York Times on a Saturday, you can improve your business judgment. You've got to be reading every day all the time, because you don't know what's going to be useful. So if people tell me, oh, Michael, I forgot to read, I'll do it this weekend, I can't tell you anything more beyond the fact that you've already shot yourself in the foot. This is something that's slow and steady. You don't see the benefit for the first 3 months, and then it comes from nowhere, and you see this massive spike. And you think to yourself, oh my God, how did I do that? Well, the reason you did it is because you followed the reading regimen. And that's what you have to do as well. Now, I think this is the final main finding. A lot of websites have advice or tools or guidelines on how to be fast. Speed is a stupid myth. It's obvious, right? If you are a Formula One or Super Touring or Indy 500 race car driver, you don't become fast by putting your foot down on that accelerator, and you don't become fast that way. There's technique involved. If you just put your foot down on the accelerator, you probably kill yourself. And that's what a lot of candidates do. They take the existing technique and they just try to make it faster. Now, for those of you who think I'm making this up, the entire 1980s consulting craze was built on exploiting this one observation called business process reengineering, where I think Hammer wrote the book. What Hammer said is that there are two ways a company can improve its processes. One, process efficiency. One is to take an existing process and make it go faster. But before you make an existing process go faster, make sure it's the most efficient way of doing it. So you first make it efficient, then you make it go faster. If you take an inefficient process and you try to wring out as much as you can out of it, the inefficiency in the process means you're automatically slower. So what we do with candidates is we ignore speed. We don't tell them to be fast. We focus on their technique. And here, this is just one graph of Felix, right? Others didn't really follow the advice, so they won't show this. But if you follow the advice, here she's learning the new technique. Then she's mastering the technique. Here we give her some harder cases, but you can see a general trend of improvement. And if you see each of our other curves, you see that as well. As we start re-engineering the process and increasing time, as she masters the process, it plateaus, and as she becomes efficient at the process, it drops. Now, what you need to do when you practice cases is that, whether it's estimation, brainstorming, and so on, ask yourself this: do you have the best technique for doing estimation cases, brainstorming cases, and full cases? If not, why the hell are you trying to make it faster? It's like taking a horse that has cancer and maybe even a broken leg and trying to win a race with it. It's not going to go faster. That's where the phrase "don't beat a dead horse" comes from. The guys who invented that phrase, I don't know where it comes from, obviously understood process efficiency is better than anyone else. You've got to understand the underlying process you're using, tweak it, adjust it, improve it. Automatically, if you're tweaking, adjusting the process, your speed will improve by 30 to 40%, and then as you master it, you get another 30% improvement. But if you focus on speed and not technique, you will not achieve this improvement. Now, the numbers speak for itself. All candidates who do well in the program go through this. Now there are going to be candidates who, when they're in this phase of the learning process, they are struggling. They see their time going up. What they do is they say, oh, this can't be true. Let me go learn other processes. They go learn process 1 from one website, process 2 from another website, process 3. They're looking for that magic solution. The magic solution is hard work. Do not distract yourself with multiple processes. Learn the best and become efficient at it, and then your speed will naturally decline. Now, I will very, very briefly talk through some of the other slides because I think they're important. I do believe good candidates are consistent. It is very rare. It happens, but I think it is rare where a candidate, shows a massive spike somewhere here and a trough here and a spike there and a trough there, and then they do well. It doesn't happen. Most candidates are fairly consistent. Felix was consistent. Rafik was spiked here. Let's ignore that. That's a non-case session. So let's ignore this area here. But he was fairly consistent. But he really mismanaged his emotions. You've got Sanjeev, who was also roughly consistent, but then the steady decline at the end. The bottom line is good candidates are consistent. They are consistent because they understand the underlying principles. Now, if you are rushing through sessions and watching the videos, and I'm sure some of you are doing that, you're not going to understand the underlying technique because you're going to make the mistake Samantha made of just trying to figure out the technique but not understanding how it's applied. And eventually, you're going to develop very, very debilitating weaknesses, deep troughs in your performance, and you're going to be an inconsistent candidate. Now, when you develop a deep troughs here, you're developing deep troughs on fundamentals. So later on, when we're building things on those fundamentals, it takes too much time, and you can never build it out because the gap is so large. So I definitely think you want to avoid that. Now, extreme weaknesses can be really compensated. I agree with that. Someone who has an extreme weakness, let's assume your communication is so bad, right? I would say rather than focusing on technical sides of cases, confidence, stop your case training and focus on that. Improve your confidence. Now, I also say there's another way to improve your confidence, and that's don't improve your confidence. And this may sound counterintuitive. But a lot of people believe that to sound and communicate well, you have to be confident. I think that's nonsense. They're called actors, and they are pretty good at looking confident without being confident. Now, don't go and try to mimic what actors do because they have a way of doing it and you can't, model it. But what I would say is that learn good communication phrases to hide the fact that you don't have the content knowledge. Once you learn that technique, then come back to learning the technical side of things and learning how to show the confidence and how to communicate better. But my point is that if you have an extreme weakness, it's going to debilitate everything else because this extreme weakness is going to be lagging and it's going to be pulling everything down. You want all of your skills to be roughly the same band so you can dedicate one third in each session. If you're in a situation where, let's assume this communication skill is so bad, it's actually going to be hurting everything else, so you can't actually focus on everything else. So try to get the balance before you begin your training. Now, when I first start cases, I'm teaching people things. So we do sessions, but then we do fewer and fewer sessions. The reason why we've done more sessions here is because these are estimation cases and brainstorming, so you can finish more. But as we get to full cases, we're going to do one case a session. Now, if a person is truly improving and truly becoming efficient, pretty soon I can do more cases per an hour because they can finish more, even more. Eventually, when you get to the end, I'm basically doing drills with candidates. I'm throwing a case at them. As soon as they can see they can handle it, I'll move on to something tougher. And that forces me and forces them to do more cases in a session, which means that the more cases I can do in a session, the more practice they get and the more fact that they are reminded of things we covered previously. The worst thing is to do something in session, let's say 6, and never do it later. You'll forget it. So I have this idea of doing drills, whereby I'll throw something at you. As soon as I can see you can handle it, I'll move on to something else. So basically the arc is we go from teaching to practicing to maintenance. Maintenance is exactly what it is. I'm not going to do a case in depth with you. As soon as I can see you're delivering the case to a very high standard, I'll move on to something else. And that's the model you need to use. The worst thing you're going to be doing is doing these fatigue-driven cases where you're practicing 60 minutes on one case. I mean, that's a waste of time. Do you know how difficult it is to do one case over 60 minutes? It is morally draining because, I say morally by choice, because you worry whether you're committing too much time to this and you start cutting corners, right? And when you start cutting corners, no one's winning. So rather than cutting corners and saying you're doing a full case for the sake of doing it, do a shorter case but do more of them so you at least keep your energy and enthusiasm levels higher. Now, the more cases you do obviously don't help you. Yes, Samantha would do the most number of cases, but for anyone, I mean, we did spend the most time with Samantha, just painstakingly explaining things and repeating things because sometimes she wasn't understanding it. But as you can see, people always say, Michael, I want more time, and I always tell them, well, especially with clients, I'll only give you the time if I think you're a good student. If I think you're a bad student, I'm basically wasting time because you're going to take the time and you are going to waste it. Why would I give you more time? So what makes a good student? That's the ultimate question. A good student is someone who pays an incredible amount of attention to the basics. Estimations, brainstorming cases, BCG style cases, McKinsey style cases, both types, type A and B, the one Kevin taught, graphs, and hypothesis development. If you pay an incredible amount of attention in those sessions and you understand that material, then it's okay to allocate more time. But building more time on a weak foundation means the time is just going to be wasted. And all of that happened with Sanjeev. Sorry, not Sanjeev. All of that happened with Samantha. Rafik was a similar problem, but a little bit different in the sense that the candidate was many times unprepared for a session, so we had to have a shorter session with him. I think Felix was ideal. I always tell people that you want to spend 30, 30, 30. 30 minutes to a full case, 30 minutes to brainstorming fundamentals. Never, ever ignore fundamentals. And then 30 minutes to dedicated questions. Candidates who ask lots of questions are always the best candidates. And you've got to ask questions in the session. No use taking a lot of notes because what are you going to do? Read your notes later? Isn't it more useful to have an ex-partner in a call with you answering your questions than reading your two-dimensional notes later? So as you can see, proof positive that a lot of time doesn't yield anything unless that time is well spent. And the reality is when you start spending 2 hours to do one session, you're going to be fatigued. Even if you wanted to spend a lot of time on something, you're just going to burn yourself out. So don't do that to yourself. Now, here candidates talk about the level of enjoyment, and you can see some big dips here, here, here. Now, are the big dips surprising? No. You don't prepare. I'm going to grill you. You're not going to be able to handle the case. You're not going to enjoy it. It's that simple. The surprising one is Rafik, whose enjoyment levels don't really drop, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because Rafik is a conservative person by nature. He doesn't overreact to things. So, his band of being very happy to being very sad or unhappy is going to be within a very narrow range. Samantha, on the other hand, tells you if she's unhappy. I mean, one session, I asked her, Samantha, try to answer this question again in a different way. And I remember she told me, Michael, why are you asking me this question if you know I don't know the answer? So Samantha is emotional. She does reach out. She does act out. And you would expect these spikes. I think Sanjeev is a little bit more difficult to understand why he would score it so low, beyond the fact that, this was session, I think it was 19 when he didn't sleep, so he's not going to enjoy it. And this was session 15 where we redid the session, so it's very possible that he didn't enjoy it because we redid it. But the bottom line is that if you go into cases unprepared, you're not going to enjoy it. So a lot of people tell me I didn't enjoy the case. The question is, did the interviewer make it bad? Was the case difficult or you were unprepared? Now, if you are unprepared, the case is automatically going to be horrible. Unless the coach with whom you are working or the person with whom you are practicing goes out of their way to try to balance that. But the coach or the person with whom you are practicing is not going to go out of their way to balance that unless you are at least a pleasant person. And you're at least trying, I've had that situation with Samantha, Rafik, and Sanjeev at certain points where I didn't think they were trying enough, and it does get to me. Whereas a coach, I can, allocating a lot of time to this, extending the sessions, changing the diaries to try to accommodate them, but I don't feel they're doing enough. And at a certain point, your coach or the person who you're practicing is going to say, you know what, the investment is not worth it. You're not committed to this. It's maybe better we part company. You don't want that to happen, especially if you find someone good to practice with, right? Now, around preparation, just a piece of advice here. When you find a BCG person with whom to practice or a McKinsey person, be very careful about what they think is going to happen in the session. do they think you are good at cases and you're practicing with them? Or do they think you are terrible at cases and you want to learn from them? I'll get this a lot of times where someone will say, hey, well, it doesn't happen with me much because people always think they're going to do badly with me. So people will come to me and say, Michael, I'm not that good. So let's see how badly I do. But when I was a younger consultant, an associate and manager, people would come to me and say, they want to practice lessons, but they don't tell me they're bad at cases. So I think they're good and they just want to learn and refine their rough edges, and I'm actually shocked. Now what that does is it creates a misexpectation, a mismatch in expectations, and I'll go away thinking I shouldn't refer this person because they're not grounded in reality in terms of what they can really do. But it's just a miscommunication that you should have told, or that person should have told me, saying, Michael, I don't know how to do cases. I want to learn how to do cases with you. If the person had done that, no problem. I'd have taught it to them. But when you are practicing with people, make sure that they understand how much you know and how much you want to learn, or it could be get very ugly very quickly, right? Sometimes I'll do a practice session with someone, I'll say, but that is an absolute waste of time. You need to practice more with people before you come and speak to me or learn how to do cases. Because you create the impression you are good. And that is just an unnecessary misunderstanding which forces you to lose a very good case practice partner. Now, I do like this slide because it's a pretty interesting slide. What you have here is time in days between sessions and coaching session. You see a big spike for Felix, a big spike for Sanjeev, and then Felix has basically small spikes. Now what happened here? Felix went on vacation. Now, just 2 points I want to make here. Going on vacation and so on is not a big deal with me if you tell me in advance. I don't have a problem. You can go for 1 month to, on some beer crawl to Germany and Russia. I'm okay with it. Just send me photos, maybe send me some samples. I'm okay with it, right? But tell me you're going to do that. Now, I was very impressed with Felix. I must be honest with you. Felix, for me, is a star student. I was very disappointed, to be honest, when she told me that at session 23, she wants to withdraw from the program because she wants more time to adjust to the culture in Europe before she applies. On the one hand, disappointed was more short-term thing because, she's going to apply. She just needs some more time to adjust to the culture, but I thought she could have done it anyway, so I can understand her reasons. But I thought that she should have started earlier rather than later. But the point is, the other reason I was disappointed in some ways because I thought it was a loss for McKinsey. I know for a fact that when Felix was on vacation, sometimes I'd send an email to the 4 candidates. And I know Felix it's about 7 a.m. in the morning in Vienna or Venice or wherever she was. And I would see her logging into her account because we get access to everything, checking her email and immediately responding, saying, Michael, if it's urgent, I can respond in 1 hour. But other candidates in the program, I'd have to send them a reminder. Do you realize you have to respond to this email? So, delays are one thing, it's the way you manage the delays another thing. And I thought Felix was just best practice there. Told me in advance what was going to happen, and even though I knew she was going to be away, she still treated the program like it was serious. Which means that when we came to extending more sessions with this candidate, we had no problems. It was not as if we had to sit down here at Firms Consulting HQ and say, Felix wants more time, should we give it in? No, hell no. This is a good candidate. This is someone that we want to send to McKinsey or BCG because we think she can have a big impact on these firms. Amazing personality, so pleasant, so intelligent, so young, so smart as well. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. This lady is pretty, good when it comes to thinking things through. So, handled it very well. The other thing with Felix is that delays had zero impact on her. You can, put her case scores, business judgment scores side by side with this graph, and you'll see that there's no dip as there's more delays between sessions. Now, that wasn't the case for the other candidates. And for Sanjeev, it happened to him. Sometimes it didn't happen to him. So he's a bit erratic there. My point is this. If you're a subscriber and you've obviously got many things you're balancing from studies to work and so on, if you learn the fundamentals well, you're not going to forget it. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. You can take a 2-month delay, and if you know the fundamentals well, you'll be able to tackle a case. You know you're not learning the fundamentals well when a delay or a gap in your studies or case preparation affects you. That's the most important sign of poor fundamentals training. Now, when people want to go on vacations and so on, they always tell me, Michael, I'm a practice. Now, I've done that. We've got clients who go on vacations, Mumbai, Southeast Asia. Some of them are calling me from Cancun and making me feel jealous when they show me photos off the beach. The point is, people who practice on holidays, their mind is never this. They're just wasting their time. So tell people, go on your vacation, but promise me that the time you do spend with me before the vacation, you will take it seriously and focus on the fundamentals. You can go away for a month. If you focus on the fundamentals before you went away, you will not see any impact. So delays matter if you don't understand the fundamentals, but they don't have any impact if you understand the fundamentals. And I think Felix was really, the gold standard here when it came to that.